Right now, protests of George Floyd's death continue on State Street tonight as Madison rebuilds and cleans up after a night of violent riots.
This is News 3 Now at 10.
Thanks for joining News 3 Now at 10. The Wisconsin National Guard, along with other law enforcement agencies, are assisting Madison police tonight in the hopes of preventing another night of violence. A curfew is also currently in effect that remains on the Isthmus until 5 o'clock tomorrow morning. Our Madeline O'Neill joins us live on State Street with a look at how things are going tonight. Maddie, it was peaceful. It sounds like some things may have changed.
This is a much different scene than we saw even 10 minutes ago. The crowd is dispersing. Earlier at 9:30 when the curfew started, we didn't see any sign of police trying to break this crowd up. We've got hundreds of people out here since it started at a few dozen. You can see police right here. Earlier there were protesters in the road kneeling with their hands up in front of the police cars. We haven't seen police advance too far, but we did see an officer come out with a face mask on. There hasn't been any tear gas that we know of yet. But before this, everything was really largely peaceful for hours. The first sign of anything we saw was maybe 10 minutes ago when a rock was thrown, and we saw another rock thrown hit the glass of the bus stop. But then about 5-10 minutes ago, we saw, oh, now I think I see gas over there. We'll show you. Okay. So we're trying to stay as safe as possible, but we did see about 10 minutes ago, all of a sudden, maybe a quarter of the crowd started sprinting towards State Street. It didn't seem like they were running from something, but rather to something. From where we've been downtown by the Capitol Square on State Street, we haven't seen any kind of looting like we saw last night. The message around the Capitol was, stay peaceful, at least from one of them in with a megaphone, and that was often met with approval, and people seem to be trying to stay as peaceful as possible. But now really with the curfew underway starting about a half hour ago, it looks like now police are starting to enforce that. So I'll let you take a look on the street there. I believe it's kind of hard to see through the crowd, but there are police cars and they're standing in front of them. So this again is right outside the Capitol. Traffic hasn't been coming through here for hours just because this group of people has been going up and down State Street.
Brothers and sisters, stop killing my people. Hey,
and that's really been the message all night from people. A lot of negativity toward the police. And we've been hearing that message again and again in different ways. Excuse me, Amanda, did you have a question?
Now, Maddie, that curfew, it started at 9:30, but when we talked to you at 9:30, it didn't seem like police were enforcing it yet. When did that change? When did police get there?
No. Really, Amanda, it was really recently. At 9:30, the protest just continued really as it had been, going up and down State Street and then kind of ending at the Capitol with some speakers, some chants we've been hearing all day, no justice, no peace, say his name, George Floyd. We kept hearing that. But then really, honestly, like 5 or 10 minutes ago, it seemed like everything changed. It may have been when that first police car arrived and a police officer got out of the vehicle. And I definitely feel the tear gas here. We're going to move it back a little bit. But that's making the crowd move away. That was in the old-fashioned area. Now we're going back towards State Street on Capitol Square.
And it seems like the crowd is dispersing, but it's hard to tell if these people are going home or if they're just moving because of the tear gas and might, gather again.
Absolutely. That was our question, too, when we saw a bunch of people run towards State Street. Were they running, just because police were going to come and enforce this curfew? Or, we saw them, it looked like they were running towards something, but we haven't seen any, sign of violence against businesses or looting or anything like we saw yesterday. But definitely there's tear gas here, and it seems to, be doing a good job of dispersing the crowd. There are a few stragglers behind us, but we're moving back, too, just to get out of the way of that. But still really hundreds of people out here past curfew right now.
But so far, I know you said one of the speakers that had the loudspeaker earlier today was speaking about wanting this to be a peaceful night. Still a lot of emotion, but wanting it to be peaceful. You haven't seen any violence, right?
Not really up to this point. When he said that, he really impressed the fact that we're here for George Floyd. We're here to be peaceful. And a lot of people applauded to that. I'm not sure if everyone Agreed, but it really did seem like a message that most people were behind. But then again, some people likely anticipated at least tear gas. I've seen gallons of milk out here, water bottles, just people prepared in case something like this did happen.
Yeah, obviously yesterday's protest started out peaceful as well, so it's kind of hard to know exactly what makes things change so quickly.
If I had to guess, I would say the arrival of a police car and curfew starting to be enforced. I mean, still, it's hard to say things are violent, but it's definitely, escalated now that police are enforcing the curfew, which did start at 9:30, and for a while they didn't.
And we just want to make sure everyone knows that, media is allowed to be out there past curfew. Have the police said anything over loudspeakers about it is now curfew, you all need to go home? Have you heard anything from the police?
I don't think I have. I might have missed it kind of in that chaos from a few minutes ago, but I haven't heard anything over the loudspeaker from police. We might not have been close enough to, but we can show you some video from earlier of these, really peaceful protests where they went back and forth on State Street, stopped with some speakers, a lot of, different chants and messages tonight, and they came around the Capitol Square. We heard lots of chants, white violence is silence, say his name, George Floyd. But then again, there was, of course, negativity toward police. We heard after the police quite a bit. And no, real confrontations, I would say up to this point. We did see one man with the megaphone who was part of this protest, ask a police officer to take off his uniform to show solidarity. And when he didn't, he asked the police officers to cover their badges. And I don't believe they did, but they moved on. There wasn't any kind of altercation.
Vigil that didn't happen, right, Maddie?
Yeah, right. We heard murmurings of that. It was by a group. I believe it was called Wisconsin Faith Voices for Justice, had considered a vigil at 6 o'clock. They told me on the phone today that they were holding off on that. Thank you for asking. We're okay. They were holding off on that just because of concern from police from everything that happened last night, and I imagine, with the curfew as well. So that vigil, we didn't see any kind of vigil, which was scheduled tentatively at 6, but we did see people start gathering for this protest at about 6:30 here on the Capitol steps, and really it just grew throughout the day. May it be from social media or as we were walking down State Street, they'd ask people who were just probably there on State Street to enjoy the day to join, and sometimes they did. So really it has grown quite a bit from earlier this evening.
And earlier at about 6 o'clock, that's when the peaceful protest started. That was only about a dozen people from the pictures that I've seen you post, and it really grew.
Yeah. I would say, yeah, just a couple dozen grew to a few dozen, then all of a sudden 50, 100, a couple hundred, as they marched back and forth. And really, police were there starting in the afternoon, even before any kind of protest began. And it really seemed like they were just either watching or even helping stop traffic as the protesters walked through the streets. So, I mean, there were a number of agencies. We saw Middleton, Fitchburg, just really area agencies. Another thing to keep in mind, and I'm not sure if the officers we saw earlier were National Guard, but the National Guard is in the area if they need to help out. And earlier we had a message from the governor who said, they would be here, but not to squash any kind of protest or any message, but to be here to protect public safety and critical public infrastructure. So, and the National Guard told me today there would be between 100 and 200 of them here. Personally, I'm not sure if we've seen them yet, but they are on hand.
And they haven't said how they are going to enforce the curfew necessarily. We know that curfew started at 9:30, but it wasn't like at 9:30 police showed up.
Yeah. Correct, yeah. Honestly, for about a good 30 minutes, it seemed like they weren't doing anything until just really that police car came and with the tear gas we just saw. I talked to the National Guard and asked them kind of what their game plan was, and they told me they weren't really able to tell me that. Now we see people running, and I'm not quite sure why. We're going to move a little bit out of the way. But people, it looks like they're kind of running up the Capitol steps. Not everyone, but certainly a good number. I would say a couple dozen.
A line of police.
And it looks like they're lining up there. Is that the edge of State Street? That's the top of State Street there, Maddie?
Yeah. Yes, that is the top of State Street. Looks like a line of police. Someone just threw a sign right before 10 o'clock when we started going live. We saw someone knock over a wastebasket. We saw rocks being thrown a little bit before that. So that's really the first sign of any sort of violence we saw all day following these guys around.
And
But
obviously,
yeah, there's that line right there now.
obviously that's very small compared to yesterday. I mean, those are very little things happening compared to the riots that we saw yesterday.
Right, at least from what we can see. I mean, there haven't been fires we haven't seen. People throwing, the pepper spray cans back and forth, or people throwing things at police, at least from here. I mean, we're kind of far from where that tear gas was, but most of the crowd also moved back. So from where we're standing, it's, nowhere near the levels of what we saw yesterday for hours.
And so once that tear gas was released, it looks like people have kind of spread out, but, it's hard to tell where they're going, what they're doing. We saw a little bit of running there, but it's hard to tell if they're going in a certain direction.
Right, I don't think there's any kind of organization anymore. I mean, earlier they were pretty organized. I mean, to go back and forth on State Street multiple times, go around the Capitol, have speakers. It really was a very united group getting their message out there. But now, with the tear gas and curfew, it really seems like people are dispersing and there's no one central group doing one thing. People are either leaving or, like you've said, there were people running up the Capitol who just have seemed to stop there.
When you talked about it being peaceful, the person with the megaphone earlier today spoke about that. Did they touch on how they felt about how yesterday went?
I think they hinted at it, that violence is not their message. They're here for George Floyd. He also said something about how, he's not directing his anger at specific police officers. He was directing it at the system. So that was what he said. And people really did seem behind this, the peaceful message and the peaceful march. But of course, with curfew, things getting dark out, the pepper spray, I mean, really the atmosphere is totally changed here.
Yeah, and it looks like they're forming another group over there saying hands up, don't shoot. And that's really been one of the major chants that they've been saying today as they walked up and down State Street.
Yeah, we've definitely heard that one multiple times. No justice, no peace. This is not a riot. This is a revolution. Again, of course, F the police. We're hearing that quite a bit. But then again, we also hear justice for George Floyd. Now it looks like a decent amount of people are starting to walk toward the line of police, and the line of police is now advancing toward them. So we'll keep an eye on the situation.
And again,
like the police have
this is the first time we have the National Guard here in Madison. This is the first night. Yesterday, the National Guard was not here. They were deployed to Milwaukee, though. Have you seen any National Guard's soldiers there?
Correct. You know what, Amanda? I'm trying to figure out who is who. Before this, I hadn't. I'm not sure if this line it says police on their vest, so I don't think so. But I can't with certainty say that we've seen National Guard yet.
And of course, they've said they will enforce the 9:30 curfew. It took a while for them to get there, and about just before 10 o'clock is when a big police presence showed up. And Maddie, you're saying that's kind of when people dispersed and got a little more angry.
Yeah, and that very well could have had National Guard soldiers with. It was hard to see with the tear gas and the big crowd. But yeah, right about 10 o'clock, before 9:30 to I'd say like 9:50, things were kind of progressing as we've seen all day, with just a few differences, like a couple rocks thrown. So now they are in the street, kneeling with their hands up, and we saw a very similar image earlier over by Old Fashioned, still on the square, right before there was a bunch of tear gas and the crowd dispersed. But officers are holding steady there.
And Maddie, it's interesting to see. I mean, I know during these protests, we've kind of forgotten that we're in the middle of a pandemic, but a lot of people there have masks. Have you seen most people wearing masks? Obviously, social distancing has kind of gone out the window for these protests,
right,
but
yeah.
Some have masks on.
Right, correct. Yeah, social distancing isn't really a thing, as you can see, but a decent amount are wearing masks. It's hard to put a percent on it, but I mean, then again, a lot of people aren't aren't wearing masks. Maybe 50-50, it's hard to say. But I mean, right now looking, I do see a decent amount of masks in the crowd. But you bring up a good point. You know, for weeks we've been talking about this pandemic, and it seems, I mean, it's such a big thing, but now this is definitely taking the focus off of that.
And what we're seeing now, them kneel in front of the officers, this is a very, this is an image we've seen across the country. It looks familiar. You know, we've seen these pictures from cities all over the country, and it's a peaceful protest kneeling in front of those officers.
Absolutely, it's a very powerful image. Currently, as far as we know, peaceful protest. I mean, we didn't see any sort of violence or looting that we did yesterday, you know, before this. So
it's hard to tell.
They're saying
can you hear what they're chanting? I can see someone in the front who's laying on their stomach. I mean, it looks very similar to the situation that George Floyd was put in when he was arrested and his hands behind his back.
Exactly. They're saying this is not a riot, this is a revolution. They've been saying that for a while. It's a message that's been echoed throughout the night, but that's what they're saying right now. I'd say this is a pretty large crowd, especially since dispersing, to be here right now.
Wow. And it is powerful to see many of them kneeling, many of them laying with their, you know, faces on the ground, similar to the video that all of us have seen of George Floyd with a knee in his neck.
Absolutely. I'm sure that's the image they're trying to convey, and it's a powerful message.
Yeah, and I know
and it's a number of them, really.
Brian Mesmer is getting up higher so we can see a little bit of, you know, how big this crowd is.
Absolutely. You know, we were talking before about how it seemed like people were dispersing. We didn't know where they were going or if there was, you know, any kind of unified goal, but it seems like this is kind of bringing them back together. People who may have left kind of coming back to this area right in front of the Capitol with this line of police officers right here. They're getting, it looks like a few of them, at least at the very front, are standing and getting closer to the officers. So far, you know, the officers are just standing there.
Have we seen, since that first tear gas when we first went out live to you, Maddie, have you seen any more tear gas? It looks like that hasn't happened in a while. They're getting so close to the officers.
Yeah, I think it happened a couple times right in the same area. It's hard to say exactly how much, but in this area where we are now, you know, I'm breathing in, I can still feel it in my throat, I can feel it in my eyes, but that's from before. We haven't seen any more come through since we've kind of had this crowd come and get near this line of officers. I will say, Brian, if you want to pan over, there is another line of officers forming here behind them. Again, there's no one really between this line and the other line of officers except for us right now. But those look like police as well. Maybe Madison police, we can't tell from here.
Maddie, I know you've talked to the National Guard today. Did they give you any details about their plan for enforcing this curfew? Oh,
we've got more pepper spray right now from the officers at that one line. So we can kind of feel that. It's definitely dispersing the crowd.
Yeah, we can see that pepper spray that was just sprayed on that group that was kneeling. I know there were a few people that were getting in the faces of those officers.
Yeah, correct. You're right. A lot of them seem to be doing their best to handle the spray. Just stay there. Oh, someone's getting sprayed directly, and now they're going back. The crowd is moving back. And that line of officers is kind of advancing.
It looked like there was some sort of a conversation happening between the people on that front line and the police officers. Are police officers saying anything to those protesters?
You know, Amanda, we're kind of far away, so I couldn't hear what they were saying. But earlier today, I've heard a decent amount of interactions between police and protesters. I don't know if the word is unfriendly, but I don't think it's been necessarily positive interactions. I mean, like I said earlier, some protesters were asking officers to cover their badge. Officers were saying no, but being clear, they said you can do whatever you want, you can share your message, but they're just there to do their job. So, you know, we've seen these images across the nation of some police officers kneeling with the protesters. That's not something I've seen from Madison Police or any area police agencies today. That's at least something I haven't seen while being out here.
Yeah, I know we saw the Beloit police chief kneel with officers today. Chief David Zabolski, he kneeled with some of the protesters, and they cheered and everything. So I think we're seeing some of those images across the country, but obviously the protesters tried to get that to happen here, and that didn't happen.
Correct, and I didn't hear any protesters specifically ask them to kneel, but they were asking for signs of solidarity, asking them to cover their badges, which I didn't see. Right now, I think we might be able to get a little closer. There's definitely a line of people. They're yelling some things at police. Police don't really seem to be engaging.
Yeah, and that's what we've seen last night as well. Not a lot of police engaging, responding to what the people are yelling at them, kind of just standing there, stoic. But it's hard to understand what the message is from police at this point. Obviously, they've been saying they're going to enforce the curfew, so that must be their stance right now.
Exactly, that's what it seems to be. I mean, all day leading up to the curfew, they didn't do anything to impede protest by any means, but I think, now that it's past that 9:30 point, and they've been saying that, excuse me, that's just the spray. They've been saying that this will be enforced. I think that's what we're seeing happen now.
Yeah, and I know yesterday when police first got there, they said something over a loudspeaker, this is an unlawful assembly, but we haven't heard anything over a loudspeaker from police tonight, from what you've heard, right, Maddie?
No, man, I haven't heard anything like that yet. It might just be where we are. Sorry, it's getting hard to breathe out here. We're definitely, they're definitely using the spray. I even see a protester with a gallon of milk just standing right up there, because when they spray, it is right at these people. It is literally like in their face. So I cannot believe, honestly, that some of them are still standing so close to officers, because we're a good 30 yards away, and as you can hear from my voice, we can definitely feel the spray way over here.
Yeah, we saw them, we saw pretty well in this feed, them get sprayed right in the face, some of them that were kneeling right in front of the officers there. I can't imagine how they're dealing with that.
No, I know. I mean, like I said, I'm decently far away compared to them, so I really don't know how they're still up at the front lines with them.
It does look like a lot of people have backed up. There's not as many people kneeling in front of the officers right now. It looks like they're kind of going to another group at that intersection back there.
Yeah. That might be it, especially just because of the pepper spray. I don't think too many people can stay. I don't know if you heard that. I think someone was just... I don't know what that was, but yeah, definitely less people right up next to the line of officers we see right here. I'm trying to get a little bit closer to that other group without getting too close to the spray.
And again, from what you've seen, there hasn't been violence, really. I mean, you said that you've seen some rocks thrown, a garbage can knocked over, but no looting or breaking glass of businesses or anything like that like we saw last night.
Correct. I mean, we haven't been on State Street since the crowd started dispersing, but before that we hadn't seen anything. I mean, some businesses even that didn't have their windows broken last night were boarding them up just in case, because, we really didn't know what to expect. They didn't know what to expect, but now here, I'm sure you can see this now. This looks like National Guard. We are right now at the top of State Street next to the Capitol. They have shields, I would say a couple dozen, a few dozen, and it looks like they're advancing.
And you spoke to the National Guard earlier today, Maddie.
Yeah.
What did they tell you about being deployed here to Madison?
Yeah, so we asked questions that there wasn't a lot they could answer as far as what their game plan would be. We were curious how many would there be, and they could only give me an estimate of like 100 to 200. And I asked, what we'll go into enforcing the curfew, and they just said they weren't able to tell us their game plan. So we've kind of like everyone not really known what to expect tonight.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of us are just kind of watching to see what the plan will be. I mean, I know a lot of us have heard 9:30 curfew, and that will be enforced, but it's still unclear how they will enforce that, and I think we're going to find out some of the strategy right now as they're setting up this line.
So someone is sitting right in front of them with the Black Lives Matter sign. They're going right to them, and he's yelling, asking him to move, or her, excuse me, her. And it
so
just looks like the plan is to
police-
advance on the.
Right, police are starting to advance with the National Guard behind them, correct?
Correct. At least the National Guard is going up to that line of police. We'll see if they move forward at all. But that kind of looks like the plan.
And it's interesting. I mean, this is we've been covering these protests, the last day, and it's interesting to see the National Guard there. This is very new for us to see that.
It is strange to see this, in our community. I keep thinking we're on Capitol Square. I think of farmers markets. You think of all the happy memories we have out here, and this is just definitely a stark difference as these protesters are getting their message out tonight.
Yeah, and when you think about the National Guard, the other reason we've been talking about them so much recently is they've been deployed to do all these coronavirus tests. So, there's a lot of these citizen soldiers that are also learning how to test for coronavirus, and now they're out here trying to stop these protests from getting violent. And I know Governor Evers did say he was deploying the National Guard not to stop protests, but to stop them from getting violent, not to impede protesters, but to make sure, businesses aren't vandalized and critical infrastructure isn't destroyed.
Absolutely, Amanda. That was really stressed from the governor today. And you're right, it had to be just a crazy few weeks for these National Guard soldiers as they're not only dealing with the pandemic, but of course, protests of this scale.
Yeah, and
now we're hearing the crowd again say, "No justice, no peace."
No justice, no peace. That's what they're saying. And of course, we want to reiterate that similar to yesterday, this started out peaceful. There were a few hundred people marching up and down State Street, chanting that. And we were all kind of waiting to see what would happen. If it would turn violent, what the National Guard would add to the situation. And we're kind of seeing that play out now. We will have team coverage as this continues. We have Gabriela Becerra on the way there to help you with this coverage, Maddie.
Sure. And I will say there are differences from today to yesterday, right? So like you said, National Guard are here, that's different. But also yesterday, I mean, I was at home watching the TV, watching the news with a lot of you, and it really was after that peaceful protest that things started getting violent. So that was more connected, or I would say this is directly after the protests we've been seeing. I mean, these are the people that we've been walking with all day, protesting, and now we're seeing the conflict, or this play out between the National Guard, police trying to enforce this curfew after a largely peaceful protest.
Yeah, it's interesting to see them creating that line there, Maddie, because that's something that we didn't see yesterday.
Right. It really is, and now I'm not sure if they're going to make any sort of movement right now. They're just, sitting in this line, the two lines with the National Guard and then the police. And then, of course, we see the line with the protesters. And then the crowd goes back a bit. I mean, there still are, you can see there still are a decent amount of people here, even after the, oh, someone just threw a rock. So that's the first thing we've seen thrown directly at National Guard or police during this.
And Maddie, now I'm just looking at Twitter right now, and I'm seeing a tweet from Madison Police 18 minutes ago saying subjects in the downtown area have become violent, throwing rocks and assaulting an officer. Chemical agents have been dispersed. Curfew remains in effect. Avoid the area. So we are hearing from Madison Police that they say people are becoming violent there. In one case, assaulting an officer.
Sure, and that certainly would have led to the escalation we're seeing right now.
And I mean, just from yesterday, we've learned how quickly things escalate. Yesterday it started with glass being broken, and then more people start breaking glass, and other things are thrown. So I think that's the fear with officers, that once throwing stuff starts, once one person becomes violent, that starts to incite more of a riot.
Right, I definitely think that's the concern here. I mean, when we heard that first rock thrown, before all of this, maybe it was around 9:50, I heard a woman pass by saying, all right, it's getting started. So I think that's an attitude a lot of people had, just waiting for something to set something off here tonight.
Yeah, and I think the whole city has been waiting and watching. You know, we saw them marching up and down State Street, kind of unsure how the end of the protest goes. That's really what is telling. You know, they get their message across, and their emotion is so strong during the protest when they're chanting, and you know, you understand their anger, and then things change.
Right, and I think we were really interested to see what would happen once curfew starts, right? Because before there was no reason for police to step in because we didn't see any violence at that time at least. But then, you know, once curfew started, people aren't supposed to be out here anymore. I mean, efforts are made to get people to leave. I think that's really when things can escalate.
And
now I see more people. Brian, if you want to come up here. There's a large amount of officers coming from the Capitol itself, coming down the stairs right over here. Dozens for sure. So it looks like they're going to join the rather large group of officers we have on the street right outside the Capitol.
And you can see people on the grass kind of watching with their phones, just waiting to see what's going to happen next.
It really has, I think, been a mix between protesters who came here to protest, to get their voices heard, and then people, you know, bystanders watching, either joining in or just wanting to see what happens. Now we've got some police cars with their lights on coming down pretty quickly. Okay, so they've got their lights on here. Yeah, there's really a large amount of officers. I see one of the vests says sheriff, so I'm sure sheriff's deputies. Really a lot of local agencies too, like I mentioned earlier. Even in the afternoon before we saw any sort of thing start, we saw Middleton Police, Fitchburg Police, I believe State Police, so really a lot of local agencies, along with you know, National Guard, prepared to help out tonight.
And there are a lot of law enforcement officers there, the National Guard and the really police there kind of lining up. I'm kind of assuming they're going to try to push that line to get people to leave the area and disperse.
Yeah, I mean, they have the shields, helmets. I mean, they look ready to go, and there's a person kind of signaling go forward. So I imagine that's what's going to happen soon. I mean, I just have to say, now the crowd is yelling George Floyd. I have to say this, I mean, just a much different look at officers than earlier today when we were, you know, marching down the street, keeping up with these protesters. Police were just there watching, you know, or helping stop traffic, but right now, clearly, I mean, they're enforcing curfew.
And Maddie, did those officers, when they were marching peacefully, did they have this gear on, this riot type gear?
No. I mean, I saw a few safety vests. I didn't see helmets or shields or any gear like this. So this is, like I said, a much different image than what we saw for most of the day earlier.
And it seems like it's really that curfew that has changed it. So I just want to, if you're joining us, let people know that Madison is under a curfew that started at 9:30 an hour ago. Our Madeline O'Neill is there. She says at 9:30, it's not like anything changed exactly at that point, but right before 10 o'clock, that's when much of this police presence showed up and tried to disperse the crowd with some more pepper spray, and it looked like tear gas. The crowd dispersed a little, but now they're back in the street, many of them kneeling in front of these officers, yelling, "Don't shoot, hands up, don't shoot," yelling George Floyd's name.
Correct. Now they're advancing and some people are running back. I mean, this all happened really quickly, and like you were saying, things can change so fast. Someone just poured some kind of liquid on the officers. They're responding with spray right now. People are running. I mean, it's just this first line of officers advancing, right? We saw a lot of enforcement come in, but as of now, it's just this first line. More spray being deployed. I mean, really hitting people close on there. I'll let you guys just kind of watch.
Yeah, that spray is hitting them pretty close. Pretty close in their faces.
Yes. I can't imagine. Like I said, we're far away and we can feel it. So that's, I mean, yeah.
And is this I'm trying to tell what those shields say. Is this the sheriff's office?
I believe so. The sheriff's, yep, this is the sheriff's office. It looks like they're a big group together right there. And then, of course, National Guard. We have another group of them. And then the original Madison police officers that are kind of on the front lines going forward.
And once again, from what you have seen, we haven't seen, oh, it looks like we're seeing possibly
I just heard
an arrest
something
right now.
Let's see. It is certainly possible. Yep. That looks like, if it is an arrest, and I believe it is from what we can see here, that will be the first arrest that we have personally seen. But Amanda, like you said, I know you saw on Twitter that police said someone was getting violent.
Yes, they did. They said that. Let's see if there's any updates. No, that's the last thing that they've said. Subjects have become violent, throwing rocks and assaulting an officer. Chemical agents have been dispersed, and curfew remains in effect. That's a tweet from the Madison Police Department. And we're seeing that curfew being enforced right now.
Right. I mean, like we've been talking about, things can change so quickly, and it looks a lot different now than even a minute ago, because before the street was pretty filled with protesters, people who have been here all day, and now, I mean, I don't know if you can tell, but this mainly looks like officers to me.
Right, and there were, like you said, at the end of this march, there were a few hundred protesters there.
Correct. I mean, it grew pretty large. I mean, they were there for a long time today, too. So really, their protests just gained more and more momentum until we got to 9:30 and the curfew started. And then eventually about 9:50 when the curfew started being enforced. So we're going to try to get a little bit closer to see what's going on here.
Sure. And I know you said during that protest when, you know, it was very peaceful going up and down State Street, they talked about staying peaceful tonight. They made that a point to say their message is one of peace, and they didn't want to start any violence tonight.
Correct. And I mean, obviously we can't say that the man with the megaphone was speaking for everyone, but it did seem like the crowd responded to that, and we're behind the peaceful message. I will say, when we first heard that first rock thrown before kind of all of this started around 9:45, I couldn't tell if people were cheering or booing. I think it was a mix. So I think it kind of got to the point where, you know, to this kind of escalation point where when police started enforcing curfew, that's when people, I wouldn't say they're being violent in front of me, but it's definitely a different scene than we saw when they were marching.
And that really started when the large police presence showed up about 9:50, just before 10 o'clock.
Correct. And I mean, the first police car we saw, when an officer got out wearing a gas mask, people were yelling, you know, get back in the car, don't get out here. Excuse me, what? Oh, and it looks like, is that another arrest?
Another.
Yes, we have another arrest, it looks like.
And I know, Maddie, last night there were only 3 arrests the entire night. We've already seen what looks like 2.
Correct. So I imagine we might go a little bit higher than that 3 number tonight, at least from the way things are going right now.
It seems like police, law enforcement, National Guard, they are much more prepared than they were yesterday, in that, you know, they saw what happened yesterday, they saw the violence, and they made plans to prevent that from happening again today.
Exactly. I think that was kind of the goal, seeing what could happen yesterday and just being prepared for anything. I mean, like we've talked about, we didn't really, you know what to expect tonight, but I think, you know, we kind of had to be prepared for anything, including what we're seeing right now.
And again, from what we've seen today, what you've seen today, we haven't seen anyone breaking into businesses or looting compared to yesterday. A lot of businesses along State Street were broken into. We had a police car, a squad car, set on fire. One was vandalized. They tried to flip it over, but we haven't seen destruction of property like that tonight.
Correct, at least not right now. I mean, I know a big part of that destruction was on State Street, and right now we're sitting along the Capitol Square and haven't been to State Street since the curfew started being enforced. And like I said, people were running that direction, but we personally haven't heard any. We're hearing something down the street. Looks like fireworks or something like that. But no, we hadn't seen any looting, at least, you know, up to this point, unless we're missing something elsewhere.
Yeah, Maddie, I could just see from zooming in on the camera that it looks like there is some more chemical agent, whether it's tear gas, pepper spray, dispersed down there, and then the crowd has spread out and kind of run off in different directions down the street there.
Correct. And I see the crowd, I mean, in that, I'm not sure exactly what street that is. That might be, I'm not sure, but just a little bit farther down, people look like they're in the street. I mean, now we see the National Guard coming forward. I'm not sure what they're doing, but they're coming toward the Capitol right now.
It is such a difference tonight to see the law enforcement response, because last night there were way more protesters than there were police officers, and that was really impeding, it seemed like, their ability to handle the crowd.
Correct. I think, like we said, they had to plan for anything, and especially with the National Guard here and kind of preparing for the possibility of this going past curfew, which I think we kind of realized at about 8:30 or 9 that this protest, as peaceful as it has been, was not going to stop at curfew.
It sounds
We're
like
hearing something over
there's
megaphone.
a message from the National Guard. I'm trying to hear what they're saying.
Me too. Well, we missed that. So no, but really, Amanda, this crowd, at least on the Capitol steps where they spent so much of their time protesting and chanting and speaking today, is gone. I mean, this street is now littered with police officers and National Guard. You know, dozens, really, if not 100 at least, just on this part.
Yeah, such a different scene than last night. Do we know, I know they pushed that crowd down the street there. Sorry, it's hard to tell what street that is. Do we know, did that crowd disperse?
It's hard to see from here, too, just because we're kind of blocked off from going there. But this, I believe, is Wisconsin Ave. And I do see another line of officers down that way, so more people won't advance toward the Capitol. And I did see some people in the street, but it really looks like people dispersed that way. Now, over near State Street, where a lot of this, we saw a lot of the sort of violence yesterday afternoon, where State Street meets the square. We still do see a line of officers here, and I did see a few protesters behind them, but I'm not sure if they're still there or not. Really, definitely outnumbered by officers, at least by the Capitol at this point. We're going to head there to see, though.
Yeah, and it seems like that's where the lines of officers were coming from. They were kind of setting up over there near State Street and then advancing along the Capitol Square.
Yeah, that's correct, and that kind of seemed like the game plan to kind of push the crowd away. But yeah, we're getting closer to the State Street area, and there are still a few protesters here in a line. And we are behind the line of officers right now. So that's what you're seeing there, police, sheriff's department, but then a couple dozen people standing with their arms raised, continuing their protest.
And this is at the top of State Street over there. Obviously, when that initial tear gas was released in the beginning, when the police got there, everyone spread out. So there's a bunch of different groups around the downtown area.
Yeah, really that unified group we saw of a couple hundred people marching around the Capitol and down State Street is no more after they've been dispersed by the officers here. Really, the tear gas, I'm sure, played a big role in that. But at the same time, I mean, we're still seeing plenty of people here not ready to go home. It may be curfew, but they're still protesting. They're still getting their message out there. And they may not be in the same group anymore, but it doesn't look like these people want to go home anytime soon.
Yeah, and just to reiterate, that curfew started at 9:30. Of course, the march and the protest was still happening at that point, and it was a peaceful march and protest for much of the night until about 10 o'clock when police sent out that tweet that said people had become violent and one person was assaulting an officer, throwing rocks, and then that curfew goes until 5 in the morning.
At that point, it certainly got more chaotic. I mean, the crowd was running, and you know, we saw rocks being thrown at some point, trash being thrown. I mean, there's still some construction materials that people were messing with out here. But really, like we've, go ahead.
And of course, police are asking people to avoid the area. They're hoping that more people don't join now these smaller groups that have formed around the square.
That is correct, and I think they're trying to enforce that too by officers, are spreading out. There's a line of officers right here you can probably see on the square, but then back on Wisconsin Avenue there was a line, and then there's a line right behind us. So basically they don't want more people getting together here, and I think they're trying to get people home as soon as possible to enforce curfew tonight.
I'm sure it's hard to tell, but from these people that you see here, do they look familiar, like the people that were going along with the peaceful protest?
I would say so, Amanda, but, in the sense that, this has grown so much since the beginning. I can't say if they were the ones here since 6:30. The longer we went, the bigger this group got. But this, all in all, the group that started being dispersed at about 9:50, that was the group that had been protesting and chanting and, listening to speakers and everything. So a lot of these people, I assume, have been here, if not for the whole protest, for a while.
Yeah, and I can see some of them still have signs and are still chanting, but it's definitely a smaller group over here since they were separated from kind of the larger group at the end of the protest.
Absolutely. And right now, officers are just kind of standing their ground. They're not advancing toward these people. These people, for the most part, aren't getting in the officers' faces. We did see that a little bit earlier, and that resulted in pepper spray, really close contact to people. But right now, people are they're chanting, I believe, "Don't trust the police," something along those lines. And really, that's the message we've heard all afternoon and night.
Yeah. Can you explain a little bit about the demographic of the people that you saw at the protest? It looks like, at least this group looks like a lot of young people, but it's hard to tell.
Sure. Certainly a lot of young people, like we see at a lot of different protests. But I will say there was an age range. I've seen children to, older adults. So it's not just young people. Certainly a big number of young people tonight, but certainly a range. It's not just young people out here protesting.
And now, I'm sorry, I'm trying to hear what they're chanting. Can you tell what they're saying now?
I believe they're saying, "Don't shoot." And that's something we've heard tonight. Hands up, don't shoot. We've heard that over and over tonight. And now we have another group coming over here of officers. Looks like Sheriff's Department in their gear.
Right. We saw earlier a lot of it looks like they're forming more of a line here. We saw earlier a lot of the protesters approach this line and, kneel in front of them, yelling those chants, get closer. But it seems like this group is staying further back.
I'm sorry, man, I didn't hear the last part of your question.
It seems like this group is staying further back and they're not approaching the police.
Correct. Right now, as of here, they aren't approaching police. We've seen more get in this line here. And it looks like they're kind of dispersing off of State Street a little bit. So, definitely a lot less than we were seeing earlier.
Yeah, I guess we're waiting to see if this line will continue to push forward to try to get these people to go home.
Yeah, correct. And I'm trying to get a better look down State Street to see what we have down there. And it doesn't look like too many people on State Street, but there are certainly police cars.
Oh, it looks like they've blocked
and people
off
walking.
State Street.
Correct, yes.
And continuing to yell at officers, but a different scene than what we saw earlier. Now, I know we have our Gabriela Becerra there too. She just arrived on scene trying to give us a different angle of what we're seeing tonight. Let's switch to Gabriela Becerra there. Thank you so much, Maddie. Gabby, what can you see? What can you tell us about what you're seeing tonight?
Amanda, we just got to the top of State Street, right on the Capitol. There is a line of officers standing here, just standing there, and some people gathering. I'm gonna have my photographer pan around so you guys can see there's someone playing with a basketball, and officers are standing there, not really doing anything. He just threw the basketball at the light post, but missed. People are getting closer to the officers, but trying to make peace. There's someone sitting in the road in front of the officers. Can you see that, Amanda?
Yes. Have you seen any violence towards these police officers? From what we've seen in just the last few minutes, it's a lot of yelling at the police officers, but they haven't really approached them. This group hasn't approached them. Have you seen, as you were getting there, any violence?
Amanda, one man is walking along the line of the officers, but it doesn't appear that there's any violence going on. He's just walking up very closely to them. There's someone sitting in the middle of the road, and the rest of the people are kind of behind that person. I don't know. It sounds like they're having a conversation of some sorts, but I'm not really exactly sure what that is. There's people gathering around State Street. Amanda, when we were walking in, we saw ambulances pulling to the scene. We do not see those ambulances now, so I'm not too sure about where those went. But there's a lot of shouting. I can't really make out what they're saying.
Now, Gabby, for me and you, we were, paying attention to this yesterday. You were there yesterday as well. It looks very different for me to see this line of officers. It looks like there are way more officers there because we have the National Guard, because we have the help of all these other police departments. They seem way more prepared than they did yesterday.
Amanda, I would agree with that. There are a lot of officers on this line here. My photographer Troxel is going to get a little bit closer to the scene so you guys can see exactly what's going on. When we were walking in, we did see a lot more officers getting ready to join the crowd. I'm not sure where they went, so it seems as if there's multiple groups of officers deployed around the city right now.
Yeah, and they seem very organized. Earlier when
They're starting to move. They're starting to, Amanda, take a look. They're starting to move away from that line there. I don't know what that means or where they're going. They're gathering in a huddle behind that line.
Yeah, I can see that.
I'm not sure what's happening. They're dispersing. Now people are... Troxel. I can't. I'm not with him. He's so close.
And it seems like that group there,
Amanda, they're shouting. They're shouting. Hands up. Don't shoot. That was a common chant we heard yesterday, both at the protest, the peaceful protest, and at the violent acts following in the later hours that evening.
Yeah, and we've heard that many times today in the peaceful protest that we saw earlier. Of course, that peaceful protest ended maybe around 10 o'clock. Just before that is when the heavy police presence arrived. The curfew, again, started at 9:30, and it is in effect until 5 in the morning here in Madison. So those police are ready to enforce that curfew. They tweeted just a little while ago saying they want people to avoid the area. They say subjects in the area have become violent, throwing rocks and assaulting an officer. Chemical agents have been dispersed, and that curfew remains in effect. So they're trying to get people to avoid this area, and it looks like they're really going to enforce that curfew with this line of police officers.
Yeah, Amanda, I want to point something out. There's a person sitting in the middle of the road here between the officers and these people rallying, and it's hard for me to tell whether she's screaming at the ralliers or the officers, because she's facing the ralliers. I don't know if she's leading them in some sort of thing or if she's telling them to go home. I can't tell.
And it looks like she's crying. She's very emotional.
Yeah. As a lot of people out here are emotional, and they're showing it in all different ways, in anger and sadness. Over the past 2 days, Amanda, I've seen so many emotions out here.
I didn't even know y'all were out here. I didn't even know what was going on. I just didn't want to go home, and I was taking me a ride. That's it.
We're trying to listen and hear what she's saying.
See y'all out here, and I said, you know what? I was parked three blocks away. And
There's some... Okay, sounds like it sounds like a motorcycle maybe is gathering some attention from some of the protesters out here.
Did you understand what she was saying, Gabby?
You know, I was trying to listen as best I could. What I did make out what she was saying was, I didn't want to go home. She's getting up now.
Yeah, it's interesting that she's facing the protesters.
Amanda, we're walking towards what seems to be loud noises. That sounds like a motor, but I can't see. I'm not close enough yet. Oh, they're trying. It's a car blowing exhaust into the air. Truxel, get away! There's a glass that's about to break at the State Historical Museum any moment.
And this is the first vandalism that we've seen of, you know, a storefront, a business down there on State Street tonight. Of course, we saw a lot last night, but this is the first, you know, glass that we're seeing, at least live on our air. From what we've heard from police, they're assaulting police, but we haven't heard of businesses being looted or destroyed.
Yeah, Amanda, this is the first I've seen of broken glass tonight as well. Again, this car keeps blowing exhaust. I don't know what effort this is part of.
And is State Street, that we were there at the top of State Street, you were there last night, Gabby, is it blocked off in any way still? Are people free to roam around that area?
Oh, it looks like some people are starting to. Oh, yeah, definitely. I'm out of here. I just heard someone say that's it, I'm out of here. So, Amanda, to answer your question, me and my photographer, we just got to the scene. We were able to walk right in. I'm not sure if they have any barricades up. I did actually, Amanda, I did see road closed signs up close to the Capitol on East Wash.
I see, but nothing, you could walk down State Street right now. That's not blocked off.
Oh, but let's get a little bit closer, Amanda. I don't know if you can see, but when you get closer to walking towards State Street, there are officers with squad cars down there. I can't really see what's beyond the squad cars, if that's just officers or if that's people out here rallying, but there is some sort of barricade here caused by those squad cars.
And of course today, Gabby, I mean, we saw some really powerful footage of all of these volunteers show up to State Street to help wash the graffiti off of businesses, wash the graffiti.
No justice,
I want to make sure you're okay, Gabby. We saw all of these people come help clean up today, and now this could be starting again.
Amanda, I just want to share with you that this scene is a lot more fluid than what we saw yesterday, and I think that might be because there's less people out here. People are kind of walking up towards the police, they're walking away, walking back. It's more fluid up here at the top of State Street.
And I know, you try to get away from situations where people are approaching you, but what they're yelling is no justice, no peace, similar to the, I mean, it's the message they were trying to get across in their protest earlier today.